The cop who arrested Keith Richards had him dead to rights, 7 years minimum, career over. But instead of reading him his rights, the officer said, "My son died from this same drug last year. I won't let you be next." What he did next broke every rule and saved Keith's life. It was February 27, 1977, at the Harbour Castle Hotel in Toronto. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police had just raided Keith Richards' hotel room and found an ounce of heroin, enough to charge him with trafficking, which carried a mandatory minimum sentence of 7 years in a Canadian prison. Keith was handcuffed, sitting on the edge of his hotel bed, and he knew his life was effectively over. The Rolling Stones would be finished, his career would be done. He'd be in prison until he was 40 years old, and by then, nobody would remember who he was. The lead officer on the raid was Sergeant William Campbell, a 20-year veteran of the RCMP. He was in his late 40s, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that comes from seeing too much human suffering. While the other officers were cataloging evidence and taking photographs, Sergeant Campbell stood by the window, looking at Keith with an expression that wasn't quite what Keith expected. It wasn't anger or disgust or even professional detachment. It was something else, something that looked almost like pain. After the other officers left the room to process the evidence, Sergeant Campbell sat down in the chair across from Keith. For a long moment, he didn't say anything, just looked at Keith with those tired eyes. Then he spoke, and what he said was not what Keith expected at all. "My son died from this same drug last year. He was 19 years old." Keith looked up sharply, not sure he'd heard correctly. "What?" Sergeant Campbell pulled out his wallet and showed Keith a photograph. A young man with dark hair and a bright smile, wearing a high school graduation cap and gown. "That's Michael, my boy. He started using heroin when he was 17. We tried everything: rehab, therapy, tough love, unconditional love. Nothing worked. He overdosed in his bedroom while I was at work. My wife found him." Campbell's voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly as he put the photo back in his wallet. Keith didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry" felt inadequate, but he said it anyway. "I'm sorry for your loss." Campbell nodded. "I've arrested dozens of addicts since Michael died. Every single one I see my son's face. And every single one I think, maybe this could have been the moment someone saved him. Maybe if one cop, one judge, one person in authority had looked at Michael and seen a sick kid instead of a criminal, he'd still be alive." Keith was starting to understand where this was going, but he was afraid to hope. "Why are you telling me this?" Campbell stood up and walked to the window. "Because I have a choice right now. I can do my job the way the law says I should. I can charge you with trafficking and you'll go to prison for 7 years. Your career will be over. The Rolling Stones will be done. And in 7 years, you'll get out and probably be dead within a month, because prison doesn't cure addiction, it just delays the inevitable." Campbell turned back to face Keith. "Or I can do something different, something that will probably cost me my career, but might save your life." Keith's heart was pounding. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about breaking every rule in the book," Campbell said. "I'm talking about reducing these charges, getting you into a proper treatment program, and making sure you have a chance to get clean, really clean, not just for a tour or a court date, but for good." Keith stared at him. "Why would you do that? You don't know me. I'm just another junkie who got caught." Campbell sat back down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Because I saw my son in you. You're 33 years old. Michael would have been 20 if he'd lived. You're both talented. You're both loved by people who don't know how to help you. And you're both killing yourselves with the same poison. The difference is, Michael's gone, but you're still here. And I'll be damned if I'm going to watch another young man die when I have the power to help."
Keith felt something break inside him. This cop, who had every reason to hate addicts, who had lost his son to the same drug Keith was using, was offering him a lifeline. "What do you need me to do?" Campbell's expression was serious. "First, you need to want to live, really want it. Not just want to avoid prison, but want to be alive and healthy and making music when you're 50, 60, 70 years old. Do you want that?" Keith thought about it honestly. Did he want to live? For so long he'd been numb to that question, but sitting here, looking at this man who'd lost his son and was still trying to save lives, something shifted. "Yes," Keith said, "I want that." "Good," Campbell said, "because here's the deal. I'm going to pull every string I have. I'm going to talk to prosecutors, judges, anyone who will listen. I'm going to try to get these charges reduced to simple possession. You'll still face consequences, but not 7 years. Then you're going into treatment, real treatment, and I'm going to check on you, personally. If you screw this up, if you waste this chance, I promise you I'll make it my mission to ensure you never perform again. Understand?" Keith nodded. "I understand." "One more thing," Campbell said. "When you get clean, and I'm saying when, not if, because I'm not doing this for you to fail, I want you to do something for me." "Anything," Keith said. "Tell your story. Tell people about the cost of this drug. Tell them about the second chances and the people who don't get them. Keep Michael's memory alive by being the person he didn't get to become. Can you do that?" Keith felt tears in his eyes for the first time in years. "I can do that. I will do that." Over the next several months, Sergeant Campbell did exactly what he promised. He worked with prosecutors, provided character testimony, and helped arrange for Keith to enter a proper addiction treatment program instead of going to prison. It cost Campbell politically. His superiors questioned his judgment. His colleagues thought he'd gone soft. Some even suggested he'd been paid off or starstruck. But Campbell didn't care. He'd made a promise to himself after Michael died. If he ever had the chance to save someone from his son's fate, he'd take it. Keith entered rehab in the summer of 1977. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. Withdrawal was agony. Confronting the reasons for his addiction was even worse. But through it all, Sergeant Campbell checked in. He'd call the facility once a week to see how Keith was doing. When Keith wanted to quit, Campbell would remind him, "You promised me. You promised Michael. You're not done yet." Keith completed the program, and for the first time in years, he was truly clean. Not just abstinent, but mentally and emotionally ready to stay that way. When he walked out of that facility, the first call he made was to Sergeant Campbell. "I did it," Keith said. "I'm clean." Campbell's voice was thick with emotion. "I knew you would be. I'm proud of you, Keith. Michael would be proud of you too." Keith returned to music, and true to his promise, he stayed clean. He wrote Before They Make Me Run about his arrest and recovery, though he never publicly revealed the role Sergeant Campbell had played in saving his life. That remained private, a sacred trust between the two men. But Keith and Campbell stayed in touch. They'd meet whenever the Stones toured near Toronto. They'd have dinner, talk about life, music, recovery, and most importantly, Michael. "Tell me about him," Keith would always ask, and Campbell would talk about his son, his dreams, his talent, his struggles, his death, and Keith would listen, really listen, because he knew he was living the life Michael should have had. In 1985, 8 years after the arrest, Keith attended Sergeant Campbell's retirement ceremony in Toronto. Keith stood at the back of the room, not wanting to draw attention, but Campbell spotted him and called him forward. "This man," Campbell told the assembled officers and officials, "is the reason I stayed on the force after Michael died, because I got to save him. And in saving him, I kept my son's memory alive." Keith spoke briefly, his voice shaking. "Sergeant Campbell gave me something I didn't deserve, a second chance. And more than that, he gave me a reason to take that chance seriously. He showed me that my life had value, not just to me, but to the memory of a young man I never met. I've been clean for 8 years because of what this man did, and I'll stay clean for the rest of my life to honor his son." After Campbell retired, Keith established the Michael Campbell Foundation for Addiction Recovery. It provided treatment for young addicts who couldn't afford it, with a focus on intervention over incarceration. Keith funded it personally and made sure Sergeant Campbell sat on the board. "This is Michael's foundation," Keith told Campbell.
You saved me so I could do this, so Michael could do this through me. Over the years, the foundation helped thousands of young people get clean, and at every facility the foundation supported, there was a photograph of Michael Campbell with a plaque that read, "In memory of Michael Campbell, whose loss inspired second chances for others." Sergeant Campbell attended every foundation event until his health began to fail in the early 2000s. Keith would visit him regularly, and they'd talk about the lives they'd saved together. Keith through his music and advocacy, Campbell through his compassion and courage. In 2003, Sergeant William Campbell was diagnosed with cancer. Keith visited him in the hospital in Toronto. Campbell was weak, but his mind was clear. "I need to tell you something," Campbell said. "When I saw you that day in the hotel room, handcuffed and defeated, I made a decision that went against everything I'd been trained to do. I put a criminal's life ahead of the law. My superiors were right to question it." Keith shook his head. "You saved my life." "No," Campbell said. "You saved your life. I just gave you the chance to do it. And in return, you gave me something I desperately needed." "What's that?" Keith asked. Campbell's eyes filled with tears. "You gave me my son back. Not literally, of course, but through you, Michael got to have the life he should have had. Through you, he got clean. Through you, he made music and helped people and lived to be old. You became what Michael would have been, and that gave his death meaning. So thank you, Keith. Thank you for letting me save my son through you." Keith broke down crying. "I should be thanking you. You're the reason I'm alive, the reason I got to have a life and a career and watch my own children grow up." Campbell squeezed Keith's hand weakly. "We saved each other then. You saved me from drowning in grief, and I saved you from drowning in drugs. That's what people do when they choose compassion over rules." Sergeant William Campbell died 2 weeks later, at the age of 74. Keith spoke at his funeral, telling the full story publicly for the first time. He told about the arrest, the photograph of Michael, the choice Campbell made to break the rules, and the life that was saved because one cop chose to see a human being instead of just another case. "Sergeant Campbell could have advanced his career by making an example of me," told the mourners. "Instead, he risked everything to give me a chance. And that chance didn't just save me, it saved everyone I've helped since then. Every kid who got treatment through the Michael Campbell Foundation, every person who heard my story and chose recovery, they exist because this man chose compassion." Keith pulled out his wallet and showed the photograph he'd carried for 26 years, a copy of the picture Campbell had shown him in that hotel room. Michael Campbell, 19 years old, smiling in his graduation cap. "I never met Michael," Keith said, "but I've tried to live a life that would make him proud. I've tried to be the man he would have been. And I've tried to honor the sacrifice his father made by choosing to save me instead of punish me." The Michael Campbell Foundation continues to operate today. It has helped over 10,000 young people enter treatment for addiction. Keith remains on the board and personally meets with many of the participants, telling them the story of the cop who saved his life by seeing past the crime to the person who needed help. Sergeant William Campbell taught me that rules aren't always more important than people, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is break the rules to save a life. Keith Richards is now over 80 years old and still performing. He's been clean from heroin over 45 years, and every year on February 27th, the anniversary of his arrest, Keith posts the same photo on social media. Michael Campbell in his graduation cap, smiling at the camera. The caption always reads, "In memory of Michael Campbell, who saved my life by not getting to live his own, and in honor of Sergeant William Campbell, who taught me that compassion is stronger than the law. The story of Keith Richards and Sergeant Campbell is a reminder that sometimes the most important choice we make is to see the human being behind the crime, the person behind the addiction, the life that could be saved instead of the rules that should be followed. One cop chose compassion over his career, and in doing so, he didn't just save Keith Richards, he saved everyone Keith has helped since then and gave meaning to a loss that could have been nothing but tragedy. If this story of choosing compassion over rules moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Share this with someone who works in law enforcement or addiction treatment. Have you ever witnessed someone break the rules to do the right thing? Share your story in the comments. Ring that notification bell for more true stories about the moments that show us humanity matters more than regulations.